who are going to be in that position for life.
All right, we're going to have to leave it right there. We're out of time, but thank you very much, Congresswoman Rice. We'll be right back after this with the challenger, Doug Tuman. You're watching Power in Politics. Welcome back to News 12's Power in Politics. I'm Rich Barabi. We spoke with Congresswoman Kathleen Rice just a few minutes ago. Now it's time to welcome in her Republican challenger. He is Doug Tuman. Doug, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. This is amazing.
All right, let's start right with the questions now. Mr. Tuman, we're in a blue state. You know that very well. And sometimes when Republicans run in New York, they distance themselves from the president, national policies. Others, though, of course, embrace the president and what he stands for. Where do you stand on President Trump?
That's a great question. I'm asked that question all the time. So ultimately, I support the president. I back the president. I'm voting for the president. And it's mostly because of the ideology and the policies that he stands for. I do have some gripes with our current president. I don't like the division we're seeing in this country. Now, I don't think it's the president's fault. I think a lot of it has to do with the media and social media. But I don't think he's done enough to unify the country. And a big part of my campaign is bringing people together. My campaign slogan is build a brighter future together. And I'm trying to align people under what I think it means to be American. So I support the president, but I would like to see more unity in this country. And that's one of the things I'm trying to bring.
You mentioned unity. Nothing has pulled us apart more physically, of course, than the coronavirus and social distancing restrictions. Yet the numbers are rising still across the country. Perhaps this is the second wave we've heard so much about. Do you think the Trump administration is handling the pandemic well?
I think they did a good job initially. They cut off flights from the U.S. to China. The president reacted very quickly. He did a good job with ventilators and working with the state. And I don't think we can just look at the federal government and blame Trump in particular for how we've reacted to the virus. We have to look at the state as well. We have to look at Governor Cuomo, who's been hailed as doing a great job here because he locked everything down. But he didn't allow people to use common sense, and he didn't really use common sense himself. He sent in sick COVID patients back into nursing homes. And, he caused a lot of harm here in New York with the lockdown. There's a lot of small businesses that have been suffering. I was a big part of the Reopen Nassau rallies back in the early spring. And ultimately, I think that's where we need to get to. And I think that's what the people want. They want to get back to normal, not the new normal. They want to get back to normal. I understand that the virus is very dangerous, but I think we need to start thinking about putting our resources towards protecting the vulnerable people. We know who those people are, people over a certain age, people with, underlying conditions, and then putting resources towards essentially keeping those people in a bubble while allowing the rest of society to get back to normal, because that's the only way our economy can get back.
Talk about getting back. What about relief for everyday Americans? Right now, Congress is at a standstill. What would you do if elected to try to push the ball forward on this?
Unfortunately, I think this is just a perfect example of why people are so fed up with their government and so fed up with Washington, D.C. The people are suffering. Small businesses are suffering. So, if I were in Congress, I'd be a big proponent of getting this legislation passed. People need essentially emergency aid here. We need emergency loans to small businesses. We need to get the stimulus checks in people's hands. And we need sensible aid for local governments. Local governments have suffered. But I say sensible because we need to make sure that we're not just bailing out governments that weren't doing well to begin with, that weren't watching their finances to begin with. And I think that's important. I think Americans expect that. They don't want to just be writing blank checks to people. But it's essential that we put politics aside, put the people first, and get the funding coming to the people so the economy can continue to stay supported until things get back up and running normally.
Okay, let's talk about another issue now. Police relations, civil unrest, the movement to defund the police. Where do you stand on all of this right now?
Yeah, I mean, this has been a tough issue. This has certainly torn the country apart, and I think it's unfortunate. You know, everybody that witnessed that George Floyd incident, we all agreed it was a horrible thing, and I really feel like that should have unified the country. But unfortunately, it tore us apart. Ultimately, I support the police in a very large way, and they support me. And I don't think we saw enough from our current representative to be out there supporting the police. You know, she was the DA. She wrote an op-ed basically after the incident happened saying how she witnessed systemic racism. But what did she do about it when she was a DA? She didn't do anything about it. And now as congressperson, she was absent. She wasn't out there during the George Floyd incident. She wasn't out there talking about it. She wasn't out there supporting our police. You know, the Black Lives Matter movement, very powerful movement. I like the fact that, you know, young people were out there speaking their voices and bringing attention to important issues of racism. But I think a good leader, a strong leader, would have supported that, but also would have pointed out some of the flaws in what they are trying to achieve, which is things like defunding the police. And we didn't see that from Kathleen Rice. And I think that takes somebody with a strong backbone to do that and not just pander to a movement. And unfortunately, we didn't see that from our current representatives.
Well, let me ask you quickly, do you see instances of systemic racism in Nassau County?
I think it's really hard to just say whether or not you see systemic racism. You know, there's certainly racism in this country, and there's certainly racism in Nassau County. But to categorize it as systemic and then to make very large changes based on that categorization, I think is dangerous. We really need to look at the stats, look at the statistics before we start saying things are systemic one way or the other.
Okay,
you know,
Doug,
once again,
I want to ask you, I don't mean to cut you off, but I do want to ask you about your campaign quickly, because it's an innovative campaign, to say the least. You've got a voter polling app. You're giving your cell phone out to people on the street who may or may not live in the district. Tell us why you're doing it this way. What's the goal?
Well, honestly, I think that is the role of the job, right? It's to interact with your constituents, to be a conduit between your constituents in Washington, D.C. So I'm using technologies, and these aren't new technologies. We've all been texting for years. I'm using technology to help achieve that. Our current representative is completely absent from the district. She's missed over 160 votes in Congress. That's double that of the average congressperson. And people want a representative that's going to actually give this district a strong voice. And I'm using technology to do that. I put my number everywhere. I tell people to text me. I chat with them directly about the issues they're concerned about. And if elected, I'm starting a text-based polling system where I'm going to text out every issue on the floor of Congress to all my constituents, allowing them to vote directly. And then I'm going to use that to help determine how I legislate in Congress. That gives them a voice, and it makes me accountable to the people.
All right, Doug Tuman, we appreciate your time. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're watching News 12's Power and Politics.